There are two people who couldn't be here tonight, so I'm recording things for them, just so you know.
Okay.
Here come all the bright and shining faces. Everybody. Hello, everybody. All right, folks, we're getting ready to start. I would love to have folks on camera. It's a thing of mine. I like to actually see your beautiful faces. Okay, Julia's got a thing where her camera's staying off, but she's explaining why, and that's cool. Hello, Priscilla. Okay, where are we for time? It's just 7, huh? 7:04. We have one more minute. Jesse will be on camera shortly. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, and whoever else joins us, I will let them in. So I want to welcome everybody to our regular Tuesday night Shiphrahs Circle Community Doula Program gathering. This is an educational event with one of my dear colleagues and birth worker people. I was very honored to take her class a few years ago, and I loved every second of it. I just loved it, loved it, loved it. And I love promoting people who are doing great work in the world and teaching things that help keep babies safe and keep families strong. So Moorea will talk to us about what that is. Like, why am I saying all these wonderful things about her? Because it's true, first of all. And we'll talk about the science behind what she's going to be sharing about infant sleep. So this, the ins and outs, is a primer to infant sleep. And I'm going to turn it over to our speaker, Moorea Malatt.
Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, look at all these beautiful faces I have never seen before. I'm so excited to meet you. And Samsara, I really hope that you can keep me on time track. Sometimes I have a tendency to want to jam pack all of the information and also take all the questions at the same time.
I feel you.
Give me like a 10-minute warning when I should be wrapping up, pretty please, if you can think of it.
I sure will do that. Thank you for asking.
Okay. So before I share some slides, which will help keep me on track for the information I'd like to present to you today, I would like to just tell you the teeniest bit about myself and how I got here to this spot. My name is Moorea Malatt. It is a bit of a challenging name. And I am originally, first, I started working with families as a nanny when I was maybe 8 years old, so young. I've been obsessed with babies ever since then. I've also been obsessed with lactation ever since my neighbor, when I was growing up as a child, was feeding her baby on her chest. And I then became an overnight nanny for babies. Then I was a postpartum doula when I realized that there were folks called postpartum doulas who were doing what I was already doing, who were getting paid twice as much as what I was doing. And then I got a couple of different lactation trainings, CLC and CLEC. And then kind of had a baby. I was trying for a baby, but thought that it would take a while, and it did not take a while. And then I suddenly, I had hyperemesis gravidarum. I was unable to work throughout my pregnancy. And suddenly I had this baby. And even though I had done every kind of sleep work that any parent had put into my hands, every kind of sleep training book, by the time I was a parent and I had all of my training, all of the sleep training methods weren't jiving with what I knew about infant biology and lactation and infant development. And so at the same time, I realized that I had a very unsleepy baby myself. I had the baby who was up every hour all night long for months and months and months. And as we'll talk about today, that can be very, very common, but nobody told me that it was common. And most of the babies I had worked with overnight had been formula fed. So there were some things that hadn't quite lined up about my experience with my training and then with my own experience. And I was left first with needing to find a therapist because waking that frequently, never completing an adult sleep cycle is not really great for mental health. And I wound up having I like to say, a smidge of postpartum psychosis, where I was actually manic because of lack of sleep. And that led me and my therapist to decide that I'd better figure out a method for supporting my baby, but still supporting myself and my sleep. And this was a baby who was bed sharing with me and always attached to the boob. And I couldn't figure out what to do to make that better and still maintain that relationship. So I dove into as much sleep science as I possibly could. And as I started to read study after study, and I actually was lucky enough to have pediatric neurologists as my neighbors. And as I spoke to more people and read more things, I realized that in all of the sleep books I had read, there actually had been very little actual scientific information backing any of these methods. And that was a bit shocking, especially since some of them had actually been written by doctors.
Mhm.
Um, and that led me to create a sort of what I would call a middle way method that is very family tailored to what the needs and desires of the parents are, while maintaining supporting the child in growth and development and fostering their continued attachment. So that is the work that I have been doing now for about 11 years. And I now have a great sleeper and had a great sleeper about 2 months into finally figuring out what I was going to do with my bad sleeper and supporting my kiddo through that. I then started teaching my friends who were experiencing similar challenges what I was doing. That went well. So I started teaching workshops for families. That went really well. And then I started teaching workshops for professionals to teach them some of these basics of infant sleep science and nutritional science. And now I get to teach professionals all over the world. It's one of my favorite things to do. I will give little chats like this. I have a 3 hour webinar that you can get continuing education credits for. That's called The Art and Science of Lactation and Sleep. And then I also have a full certification program for my sleep method, which is called Sleep Savvy, which is a very tailored family sleep method. I know some of you are not here as professionals and are here as families. I'm probably going to be speaking to professionals in a lot of what I say, but the information here is exactly the same for everyone, and it should be hopefully very enlightening. I just wanted to, I'm sure we don't have time for me to meet everyone, although I wish I could meet all of you. I also love the person who's bouncing there because I think maybe you must have a baby in your arms. Look at that. Okay. But what I would like is for you to know that the chat is open. And I will check chat questions occasionally. So and definitely at the end. I don't want to miss any of your questions. We're also a small enough group. Is everybody just going to be muted, period? Or are they unmuting and unmuting themselves? I'm sorry.
Well, right now, since you're tailoring it towards the chat, everybody can be muted for their
Yeah,
background stuff.
let's just leave everybody muted and put your questions in the chat for now. And then I will answer those as I get to them. And then I'll also make sure that I have time for Q&A at the end. So you can even just like put a question there as your way of keeping notes, or you can save a note for me for afterward. Great. So I'm gonna see if it's gonna let me screen share. Give me just 1 minute. It is loading very slowly. There it is. Should be coming up. And thumbs up if you can see this picture of this twins family here. Awesome. So this is our little infant sleep biology presentation. This is a cool photo of the cache of photos that are available to the public on safer bed sharing from Dr. Helen Ball and her infant sleep lab in the UK. And you can just look up, bed sharing photos, Helen Ball, and you can find photos to use if you ever are educating folks.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just gonna dive right in. Some things to note on the biology of infant sleep. There's this phrase that we always use, is that the baby is a bad sleeper, or that babies don't sleep well, or some babies don't sleep well, or my baby is not sleeping well. And one thing I want to change is a little bit of language shift around what we mean when we're saying that, and maybe we actually mean something a little bit differently. So it might be more that infants are typically, unless there's something medically wrong with them, infants, even if they have a hard time falling asleep or wake really frequently, usually do sleep well for them, according to their own biology and development. But they do have some major differences from how we sleep. And the reason we say that they're not sleeping well is because they sleep differently than we want them to, because we want them to sleep like us so that we can sleep. The first is a hormonal immaturity. So having a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep can be very true, especially after 3 months. The newborn phase is really usually a very, very sleepy phase, depending on how hungry that baby is from time to time. But in general, during that time, until about 3.5 or 4 months, we're going to have a sleep hormone immaturity, which means that babies are not producing their own melatonin. They can't do that until between 3 and 4 months. And they're only doing that between 3 and 4 months if they have regular exposure to light in the morning and day, and then a sense of the light going down or dusk happening, and then darkness at night. And having those things aligned, aka circadian rhythms, for infants, trying to get that aligned by around 3 months is actually one of the best sleep tools to mitigate that challenging period of between about 3 months to 5 months, when there are a lot of big changes in sleep and development. And sometimes for families who have had really sleepy newborns, this is the time when things start to feel a little panicky. Things are changing. I don't really know how to get baby to sleep and to stay asleep. And that's one tool, is trying to align with the light and dark, the turning of the planet. And then there is, along with that, no melatonin happening of their own, newborns. There is also the fact that the opposite hormone of melatonin is cortisol, which is, people think of it as like a crying or a stress cortisol and hormone, and it is that, but it is also our get up and go hormone. It is also a hormone that helps us function into our day, and is that kind of stress that can be helpful in various situations to actually escape a situation where we need to get out of it, or to get something done, to have enough energy to get something done in that moment. So it's sort of like a natural caffeine for us. And babies do have the cortisol, but their cortisol is not concentrated in the morning or in certain parts when we want it to happen. It's very dysregulated for newborns, and can be really very dysregulated for the first 6 months. And it can have an opposite presentation to what we see in adults, which is, if it is organized in some way or consolidated in a part of the day, we tend to see that being the evening time. That period of purple crying, the colicky nighttime, the witching hour, as many people call it. Um, and that can just be a naturally elevated cortisol being concentrated at that period of time. And so that is one of the theories around what that witching hour actually is, since we don't yet have quite an explanation of what that is for each baby. It's one possibility. We also have in new babies a physiological fear. Physiological, meaning that literally the brain, the lizard part of the brain, that old part of the brain, from dating way back in our evolution, has a fear of not being on top of a warm body. So there is a true panic for many babies when that is not happening. Then we have that Moorea reflex, the starter reflex that all of us have seen when we go to try and just put a tiny baby down in their bed or their bassinet. And especially if they're not wearing a swaddle, which is its own conversation to talk about, they will, sometimes while you're laying them down, or sometimes as soon as they've been laid down, or sometimes a few seconds later, will startle. The arms go like this, right? We had kind of gently closed fists and we were happy. And now, and it's an opening. It's a quick opening and then a grab. And the grab is for a reason. It's, I do not want to fall off of my primate parent. And even if I can't grab my primate parent's fur, and we don't have, many of us don't have too much fur these days, at least we could grab onto a branch, a leaf or something. And that's why that primate reflex is so strong. If you try and open that baby's hand when it's really tight and you're trying to get your finger in there, they can be very, very strong, and that's protective for them. But when we're in the culture that we live in, which says your baby's not supposed to be on you all the time, you shouldn't have that baby on you all the time, you're spoiling the baby, quote unquote, then we think there's something wrong with our baby when they don't want to be laid into their bassinet or their crib. But this is absolutely biologically typical. They also have very short sleep cycles. So when our sleep cycles actually have quite the range, an hour and a half to like 3.5 hours for our sleep cycles, a tiny baby is going to, especially daytime, have a 20-minute to 30-minute sleep cycle. So all of the folks who you might work with or your own baby might show you that, hey, I had a 20-minute nap and now it's time to partay, right? It's like, let's have fun. And we're thinking, oh, this baby should be having much longer naps than this. The nighttime sleep cycle in the same baby might be 45 minutes or an hour, but daytime sleep cycles are shorter. And so it is very common for a baby, especially if they have what we're going to talk about in a second, which is a strong sleep association, a way that I believe that I am supposed to fall asleep because that's what we always do. If we have a strong sleep association and a short sleep cycle, then we're good after 20 or 30 minutes. Let's go on with the rest of our day and have another nap soon. But often parents are trying to see if we can get an hour and a half, 2-hour nap at a time. And that's often not going to happen if the baby needs you to do something to recreate the situation which helped them fall asleep in the first place. So if baby has what's very, very normal and natural, but doesn't necessarily work for every family, which is that oral sleep association of having to be on the breast, the chest, or the bottle. And that's how they fell asleep for the first sleep cycle, then they will wake all of the way up rather than doing a quick roll into another sleep cycle and ask for you to replicate that again so they could have another sleep cycle, or they're just cool moving on and doing something else and having another nap later. This is when I'm talking about the fact that we are primates and we have primate infants. You can look at that tight fist right there on that chimpanzee. Oh, it's just the cutest thing. It's just like, this is a baby who, you know, evolutionarily knows how to really sleep on the go while literally grabbing with the fingers and the toes. I have talented toes, but they're not that talented. And our baby's toes aren't quite that talented either, although some of them might be a little bit. And this baby just knows how to sleep, right? And that reflex is so strong and so constant that it's even happening during sleep. And we can just hang on there. What we have now, instead of all that fur, is baby wearing, right? That's what our option is for keeping baby close. To go a little bit further into circadian rhythms and hormones, we as adults, again, have our melatonin concentrated at night. Some of us make very little melatonin and have a very hard time getting to sleep and staying asleep. And that is because we might not be following circadian rhythms very well. We might be sleeping late. We might have overnight jobs. That's one thing. We might sleep late into the morning and barely go outside, not open our curtains, and then all night for 3 hours before we sleep, we have screens in front of us, bright lights. And then we might have a really hard time falling asleep and staying asleep because we are completely out of alignment with circadian rhythms. We might see in infants when they don't have this, their circadian rhythms going yet, we might call it reverse cycling for a newborn. Oh, my baby has started reverse cycling. They want to sleep all day and not sleep at night. And really the best and only way truly through that is going to be trying to get baby to go outside and stay awake a little bit during the light time. So, and just gently nudge toward that so that we can then nudge toward being able to have darkness and sleep at night. There is a special help, though, for families who are able to provide human milk for their babies, which certainly is not everyone, but it's an extra plus for those who can do it. And that is that we can actually give melatonin to our babies through human milk. And so if being fed directly from the chest, a parent who themselves has been able to align with circadian rhythms at about baby's bedtime or a little bit after that, because newborns tend to kind of go to sleep with the parents a little bit later, um, they will be able to benefit from that melatonin. And if human milk is being pumped, or if there's donor milk, human milk for that baby, the best thing to do is to label that milk with the time of day that it was pumped. Was it pumped around dusk and onward for a few hours? That would be the best milk for putting baby to sleep, or maybe for baby's second bottle of the night. And then babies will begin making their own melatonin between 3 and 4 months, as long as they have some exposure to daytime light and nighttime darkness. Here's like some labeled milk for the time that it was pumped. Date and time and how much. So great things to have on a bottle label. And I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a sec so that I can, yeah, time matched milk is super amazing. Yes, Emily. Any questions around that section yet? Okay. Oh yeah, Jesselyn.
I just thank you for telling me about the sleep cycle, because I thought it was 50 minutes, not shorter. And I've been going on that one for a hot minute. I mean, I know it can be shorter, but that's even more illuminating than 50 minutes.
Yeah, so I actually can't remember which extra slide I put in this, but there's actually a huge variation in what these sleep cycle lengths are from human to human, period. So from baby to baby, from child to child, from age to age, from you and I will have different sleep cycle lengths. Samsara and I will have different sleep cycle lengths. And one of the general problems with infants and sleep in our culture is that all these books are written as if every baby at a certain age is the same baby. And biologically, there's no way for that to be true. And it's just not true for humans. So I think, listening to our babies, paying attention to our babies, looking at their patterns, seeing what they're doing, each baby literally will show you how long their sleep cycle length is. You don't have to do anything to get that information, but just watch them. And that's kind of brilliant that maybe the baby is the best person to give you that information, not the one size fits all book, right? All right.
That thinking causes so much heartache.
Pain, so much feel like we're failures. Or there's something, not only am I a failure, but also I might need to run around to a bunch of different medical specialists because there's something wrong with my baby, right? So that is very, very prevalent in my work, is that sometimes by the time people come to me, they've already been through 5 doctors. Because even the first doctor, their pediatrician, said, oh, this baby needs to be sleeping for longer periods of time. But really, that pediatrician didn't know anything about infant sleep. And that's just what what they want for the baby, what they're hoping will be happening. And then we go down this whole medical pathway. And all of that's very, very scary for parents. So hopefully my book gets published soon. No. We'll see.
Can't wait.
We'll see. I'm single at home schooling parent right now.
You can do it.
I know, you believe in me. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to share again. Okay. So I absolutely adore this quote by Helen Ball, who I spoke with, who is one of the premier sleep researchers. she is at Durham University in the UK, and she has her own mother baby sleep lab there. Baby's biology has not changed dramatically for over hundreds or thousands of years, but our culture has changed dramatically, and our expectations of babies and of parenting has changed dramatically over the course of just a few decades, right? So this whole thing of we say that baby's not sleeping well, but that's really not on the baby. There's so much going on with our culture, even if you just think about the difference cross-culturally between an agrarian, like a farming society, a hunter-gatherer society. Many of those, of course, still exist all over the world. And that the the experience of sleep and infant rearing is so different in those societies, especially if there's less electricity flowing in those places, because just the idea of circadian rhythms and how deeply that affects our ability to sleep is just such a large difference. And really, since the Industrial Revolution, things have changed so fast for babies. And we expect them to sleep. We also expect them to sleep like a nesting animal, like a little baby bunny. I have the babies in the little den, and then I go get food, and I leave you, and then I come back to you. That's how we expect our babies to sleep in culture in the United States and in many places around the world now, whereas that is not what is expected of our primate babies. Here's another picture from that same cache of photos. There's a little bit, this is what we would call a safer bed sharing photo. We never say that bed sharing is safe, especially as professionals in our country, in the US. We can't say bed sharing is safe. But we do know that the AAP has really started looking at the research of Dr. Helen Ball and Dr. James McKenna, and we know that they are paying attention to that awesome, very reputable research and all of the papers that have been published, and they have gradually started changing the sleep recommendations to be less, I wouldn't say they're pro bed sharing, but they're less offensive
Yeah.
these days. Yeah. And this one with the blanket over the hip is actually what we would call okay in the UK, but a gray area here, whether you could have a blanket on you at all. But in the UK, they say if it's around your hip and baby's hip, then that's good. That's in the absence of other sleep risks, that would be called a safer sleep position. That is called a C position of the arm, which prevents pillows and blankets from being near baby's head. This is a picture of a baby sleeping happily in a crib. There is one unsafe sleep situation happening here, which is a crib bumper that so many people have. And usually when you tell people you can't have a crib bumper, that's not safe sleep, that's literally something in the crib with them, they'll say, okay, well, I'll get the mesh one with the holes, right? Where it's just like a piece of mesh. And that's still considered unsafe. I personally might consider it a little safer, and especially for a younger baby. But as the baby gets a little bit older, it still has the ties. It still has things that can come loose, and so it's still technically not safe. Now, the reason that people often want these is they're afraid their baby's going to move and bump their head, or of course, an arm or a leg's going to go out of the slats. And of course that happens. Most of us who've been working with babies for a long time have seen a lot of arms and legs in the slats. And if that's baby's safe sleep space, they will learn how to manage that on their own. We don't necessarily have to protect them from the crib. Obviously, if they're truly stuck, we just help them. This is the slide on the changing sleep cycle durations. So that 20 or 30-minute nap, not atypical, not unhealthy. That infant sleep cycle is going to be somewhere around 30 minutes for the newborn, could be up to an hour. And then between that and 9 months, we're going to see all kinds of different things. We're going to see, is it 40 minutes? Is it 45 minutes? Is it an hour? Are they already up to an hour and a half, even certain babies? And sometimes then as babies age, it can be a little bit harder for you to figure out how long their sleep cycle is, because depending on how many sleep associations they have, like what they need in order to fall back asleep, if they are, quote, a good sleeper, and they don't have tons of sleep associations that the caregiver needs to keep repeating over and over and over at the end of a sleep cycle, then we'll start to see babies consolidate some of their sleep cycles. So that just means rolling from being tired enough, having enough what we call sleep pressure on the brain to just go from one sleep cycle to the next. So then it looks like, oh, they've been sleeping for 2 hours. Well, that's not a 2-hour sleep cycle. That's 2 sleep cycles quickly put together without asking for help. By 9 months, medically, we want to see babies have at least hour-long sleep cycles for some of the naps and for most of nights, being able to sleep for at least an hour at a time. For most of us, that sounds just not sustainable. Oh my gosh, even if they're naturally awake every hour, no, it doesn't feel sustainable for us. But that can actually be totally healthy and fine for the child. But if at 9 months we see that sleep cycles are still 20, 30 minutes, there's probably something going on, like a sleep disorder. There's some kind of disturbed sleep or disordered sleep happening, because between 5 and 9 months, there should be major progressions and maturations in sleep cycle length. And then by 2 years, they're getting very close to adults who have the shorter sleep cycles, between an hour and a half and 2 years. By 2 years is what we want to see. And then for adults, this is important for us when we do overnights, when we're just working on thinking about our own sleep, arranging how to get enough sleep if we've worked overnights. And just thinking, if we're going to support someone who has a new baby and we're going to be overnight, but maybe they want to nurse 1 time per night, how do we make sure that they get full sleep cycles? So Jack Newman of Breastfeeding Medicine suggests that we are trying to support really sleep deprived parents with 4 hours at a time, so that even if they have a hard time falling asleep, they can at least complete 1 sleep cycle, if not 2. So when I'm creating plans for families, or even supporting in the home, which I rarely do these days, I'm usually just remote. But when I create a plan for them, I'm actually, if there's someone who can support that baby while that parent who really needs to sleep sleeps, I'm going to try and give them 4.5 or 5 hours, because I really want to try and make sure they don't have to like freak out that they're not able to fall asleep right away, because that can cause anxiety and then you can't fall asleep. So just building in like that like 4.5 or 5 hours is going to get you some good sleep. And then you wake up and you feed the baby and then you go back to bed and someone else is with the baby. But, 4 to 5 hours at a time, that's really what we need. And, ideally getting 1 of those every day would be great. If they can get 2 of those 2 or 3 times a week with a postpartum doula, awesome. That'll really go a long way to prevent postpartum mood disorders. Getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep at a time. It's not that you have to have 8 hours of sleep per night. That's not what we need to be aiming for here, because it's not going to be sustainable for people. This, with help, with a partner's help, with a neighbor's help, with granny's help, with a postpartum doula's help, this will protect families. More on what these sleep cycles look like and the different parts of the sleep cycles. when we're looking at the whole night. So let's say that this is actually based on a little bit older baby, around 6 months. So it's going to look more disjointed than this when they're a little bit younger. But they go to sleep, and the first time they do that, they go right into REMs. They go right into light sleep, and they have just a little bit of light sleep. This is just a tiny little area, little bits of light sleep happening. There might be certain times where they're more, like right here, you notice this one's going to be a light sleep. That might be because there's something disturbing the baby. They're hungry, they're having digestive issues, there's noise, something like that. That might be happening here. But generally we go down to a light sleep. And a light sleep, I'm just going to tell you this now because this is going to save so many people so much grief, is when you read a book and it says, okay, put the baby down drowsy awake, and that's going to teach the baby how to sleep, right? So baby kind of almost falls asleep in your arms, and maybe even their eyes are slightly open and their head's a little bit like this. And that's how the books will say, put baby down like that. Unfortunately, even though it looks very light, that light sleep they've just gotten into, that milk drunk light sleep, that is not something that they're cognizant of. They're not really aware of what's happening. So a baby who constantly gets put down from arms, milk drunk, and in this light sleep, and all they have to do is go and turn their head. They're in a light sleep and they're not feeling safe necessarily, or even knowing where they're being put to sleep. And so that's why sometimes we have babies, where we hold them to sleep, or we put them down drowsy awake, but it's really just drowsy light sleep. And then we have babies who wake up crying and freaked out that I was in arms before, but now I woke up in this other place and nobody's even here. So when you're really working with folks who have been having sleep troubles and you're trying to support this family really with some sleep modifications, even though what we want, especially for newborns, because there's no self-soothing for a newborn, that's not a thing. What we usually want is to just, support baby, hold baby. But if the family's goal is that this baby needs to learn how to sleep on their safe sleep surface at least some of the time, then we need to make sure that baby feels safe there, feels safe enough to wake up and not be freaked out. So instead of tricking baby, let's be with them and support them while they're trying to figure out how to fall asleep in this safe sleep space. That's not leave them to cry it out and figure it out. That's literally be with them vocally, with touch, all of that, just so that the sleep environment feels safe. So that's light sleep, a little bit of light sleep. Then we go down into a deep sleep. They don't get a ton of deep sleep. We get way more deep sleep than babies. And sometimes when I'm working with, I also work with gentle discipline and potty learning. And sometimes people will say, my toddler, my preschooler, they poop in their sleep. I don't know what's going on. They must be in such a deep sleep. They just poop in their sleep. No, nobody poos or pees in their deep sleep. The only thing that's happening in deep sleep is like regeneration, like real quiet, calm regeneration. And babies have very little of that. We have a lot of it. What babies have a lot of is this yellow. And I had to squish this chart down. So there's actually in this chart twice as much yellow REM sleep, dreaming sleep, for babies as we have. And it used to be only decades ago that people said babies don't have dreams. Babies don't dream. They also don't feel pain. All these things that we used to say about babies, but it turns out babies are dreaming almost all of the time that they're sleeping. And
sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I got to hear the nurse who came up with that study that babies can feel pain.
yeah,
And I got to hear one of her her talks, like she's still alive. This is like so new that, you know, she's
So
like
new.
barely retired, still out there. You know, it's so like it's just interesting how it was like it's
Yes.
taken this long to
Yes.
figure that out
Thank you so much for
officially.
sharing that. Yes. I mean, this kind of story is why we need to start sometimes trusting our instincts a little bit too. Because if we know, just we even know with nutritional science, right? Like cigarettes are good for you, no cigarettes are bad for you, fat's bad for you, fat's good for you, right? We know that this, we think things are true in science and then they're disproven. So the truth is, with infant sleep, I think I have a cache of studies, which is almost all of what we have, and it's really not even that much. So there is a huge lack of study about infant sleep, and there's a huge lack of study around what infant sleep does to parents and how parents are managing it, and how to prove some of the best ways for parents to manage infant sleep. We just don't really have those things. So some of it, we're kind of just doing the best we can with what we have. So babies are constantly dreaming. And instead of that regenerative, right, because they're just babies, they're not really regenerating so much, but they are growing. And the thing that's growing the fastest, right, is their neural connections. They're just like making those connections constantly. Their brains are growing very, very fast. And that's what's happening in the dreaming. At the end of these green dots, which are wake ups from my sleep cycle, oh, 1 sleep cycle, oh, 2 sleep cycles, 3 sleep cycles, 4 sleep cycles. There could be many more than this. But at the end of this night, we've got the tired parent. The baby's like, "Ooh, ready to party. I had my nighttime sleep. Yay." And the parents were like, "I was up feeding you every hour, and every single one of my sleep cycles was interrupted, and I feel like poo-poo now." And that's just what being a new parent really is, because even though that we know that there are some ways to sync up with babies, like especially for families who are lactating and bed sharing. There are ways that doctors Helen Ball and James McKenna have seen that, like, pulses can sync up and heart rates can sync up, and even, like, I think sweat can sync up. All of these things can sync up. But this is the thing that is usually not syncing up, is the length of the sleep cycle and how many times we come out of that sleep cycle. So that will be the thing that continues to feel like, no matter what sleeping situation, no matter what sleeping environment, whether crib, bassinet, baby in the room with you, out of the room with you, there are things that will sync up based on those changes. But this one is something we can't really change. What we do know is that for lactating parents, I don't know, so I'm sorry, can you see there's someone else in the waiting room? I don't know.
I just let someone in.
Okay, I'll make my button go away. One thing that we do know, we don't know the details of this, but there seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that parents who are able to be at least providing human milk with pumping, if not having the baby on their chest, there seems to be and especially with bed sharing, there is some sort of hormonal protecting factor against severe sleep deprivation. So we actually see, a lot of people don't know this, but we see very high numbers. They're undiagnosed, but there are very high numbers, we believe, of paternal mental health challenges in the postpartum period. So I'll just say paternal. We, of course, mean all non-gestational parents of any gender, but just what we do know is that they've just done a little bit of studies with dads. And we know that are a lot of mental health challenges around missing sleep for non-gestational parents.
Mm.
And that number might actually be, in some areas, for some cultures, that might actually be almost as high as for the gestational parent, depending on how much time they actually are with the baby who's waking up frequently, rather than like in a separate room.
Mm.
And so if they're in the same room waking up really frequently, they're going to have a much higher rate of mental health challenges like depression and anxiety and OCD, etc. Now, that might be because that person who is not lactating might not have a bunch of hormones in their system that are protecting their brain against the severe effects of this sleep deprivation. And, you know, this just goes to show, like, the whole family needs support around sleep. For instance, just talking about that idea, someone who has lactation hormones might have some protection, not all, but some extra protection against some of these mental health challenges. And their partner might not have as many. If you look at rats, though, in a study of rat mamas, this is not a study where, they're doing, terrible chemical things to them, but in a way, terrible things happened to these rats because they kept them sleep deprived. And what happens in rats is they just die. If you interrupt their sleep cycles again and again and again, they just die. So there's something very unique and special about those lactation hormones for a human parent
Mm.
who is lactating. Not to say that you might not have other risk factors that completely make that positive not so helpful for you, and there's still a lot of challenges for many people. The top exacerbating reason or causational reason for new postpartum mental health challenge is lack of sleep, is sleep deprivation. Now,
Yeah.
let's look at any questions?
I was just going to say that I love this conversation because it just emphasizes something that I believe very, very strongly, which is the symbiotic nature between the infant and its mama or its birthing parent, that they're in many ways the same person for a long time. And that there's nothing wrong with that, except that it gets in the way of consumerism and capitalism and
Yeah.
that stuff. It
Yeah,
gets in the
that part
way
of our
that stuff.
culture. Yeah.
Right.
And
But
it is a dyad, that 2-in-1, that dyad. And our culture doesn't see the dyad. Our culture sees two separate people.
yeah, and that's so like not the situation having, raised a few kids. That's not even the case today.
I'm sorry, I was like, I'm still feeling like I'm attached.
I have, radar, who's going to call me today? I mean, right now with kids
Yeah.
in their 40s. So, and that's a blessing. But that's so diminished in our culture, and how many people suffer for lack of it breaks my heart.
Yeah. Well, and there are cultures within cultures too, because I would venture to say that whole like that separation and that like I'm one by myself, that's a very white culture thing, right? That's not in everybody's culture within the United
It's true, but it's also in a colonized colored culture.
Yep.
And it's done hard in a colonized colored culture. Like
Right.
folks are literally punished for bonding with their young.
Or for not hurting them. Yeah.
And how hard, it breaks my heart being a parenting educator for my African American folks, how they will co-sign being abusive towards their young, because that's what they've been taught to make them strong.
And if we think about abuse, that we go back to your first point, which is it's much easier to abuse someone you don't feel super connected to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Whew, heavy stuff. Let's get back to
More
slide.
heavy stuff.
Yeah, this might be a little heavy too in a way.
We have 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. So we're halfway in. Do you want to take a little 5-minute break, little potty break, bio break?
This is a good time for a break if people want it.
What are people feeling?
Let's just take 2 minutes right
2
now.
minutes.
Just say 2 minutes and
Just
come back when you can. Yeah. And this is a good time to like think of questions or think of things you want to make sure I cover and put that question in the chat.
2 minutes. I'll give you the warning.
And I'm probably really, so this meeting is until 9. I don't think I'm quite gonna go that long,
That's fine.
just from my own exhaustion
Oh,
from
yeah,
today's late.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You want to cover the important primary thoughts. So.
Yeah.
I have a question that's totally not related to the topic at all. It's just
Okay.
about your name.
Yeah.
I think I came in like a minute late, but is your name Moorea?
My name is Moorea, yes. And most people can't pronounce the Okina there. It's like not usually happening. So I have like a very Americanized name that I
How do
tell
people
people.
say it?
Moorea.
Moorea.
Yeah. And that's
And are
similar.
you Tahitian?
I am not Tahitian, and that is something that I am battling with all of the time. I actually spent a lot of 2020, a lot of us had various kinds of crises in 2020, but I
Yeah.
spent a lot of 2020 kind of wrestling with my name and how it came to be, and contemplating if I might take the other name, which would have been my name if I were a boy, which was Shark. And I kind of made friends with that name because I was like, actually, that's a pretty cool name.
They're both really cool.
But I then realized that like I had already made such a name for myself in a few areas that changing my name was going to be super difficult. But yeah, as a white person, I struggle really hard with having been named by my parents, name from a culture that does not belong to them. And that's true for a lot of my friends, to be honest, because that's something that happens. But I just try my best to explain my name with honor and just say there's a beautiful heart-shaped island in the South Pacific, which is part of the islands that are called French Polynesia, colonized by France, or called Tahiti. And that one of those islands next to Tahiti is Moorea. And the name actually means golden gecko. So I love my little gecko and lizard friends and really all reptiles. And that I have been to Tahiti many times and have made a point ever since I was about 12 years old to support Native and Indigenous businesses while I'm there rather than American and French-owned businesses. And yeah, so that's what I've got for my name. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I'm in Hawaii right now, currently. That's where I've lived for the last 23 years. I've been married to a Hawaiian man. I'm the mother of Hawaiian children. I've never been to Tahiti, but I think it's a cool name. And I doubt anyone in Tahiti has ever been offended that you're named that.
No, it's actually it's been quite the opposite happening there. Yeah. My parents actually inherited some land in Tahiti, which I have my own, again, feelings about. So my parents actually live there now. I can't even afford to go, but that's where my parents live.
I've heard it's very expensive. But
Like
anyway, I think it's a
$2,000 to
beautiful
get
name.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want to shame you for your name. I was like, is that her
Oh.
name? It looks like her name is Moorea.
No, I've been called out about
Sorry.
my name multiple times, and I'm really comfortable having that conversation. Thank you for that.
So I just want to give the time check that our 2 minutes is up, and we've got till 9 or as long as you need for the rest of the time.
Here we go. All right. Now we're going to talk about some of those differences for babies and for families with when we make the choice or sometimes don't have the choice about what we're going to feed babies and how that affects sleep. So I am a lactation professional, and in my line of work, there is a really common way to speak to families about sleep and human milk. And that common way is if someone says, well, my neighbor's baby sleeps through the night and is the same age because they're formula fed, and I think we need to feed the baby formula because we're not getting any sleep, right? That's a very common conversation that people are having. Because you've seen it, you've heard it, you saw it with your own eyes, and it's happening again and again. And it's a pattern that you can see out in the world. But in my field of lactation, what we tend to tell parents is, no, that's not true. There's one study that shows that families who what we call breast sleep, which is bed sharing and feeding the baby, that actually gets them more sleep than crib sleeping babies. And actually, there's no difference in actual sleep between babies who have human milk or formula. And though I know where my colleagues are coming from with wanting to promote lactation that way, they are lying. And I don't believe in lying to people. I believe in giving people the facts. And so here's the facts. The facts are that it's usually going to look like a baby who is formula fed sleeps better, quote unquote. And that's because they often have an easier time falling asleep. They often will sleep more deeply. They literally will have more deep sleep, and they will sleep for longer periods of time. They will develop longer sleep cycles. Now, how that manifests exactly time-wise in each individual baby is going to be different. So that's not necessarily across the board for every baby, but that's the general thing. And the reason is these two chemicals. Both of these chemicals are present in both milks, but there's differences. So breast milk has this cholecystokinin, which causes sleepiness. It is more effective the younger the baby, but generally wears off in about an hour, sometimes less. Doesn't this coincide really well with that hour-long infant sleep cycle or a little bit less? That's kind of a natural biological coincidence that both things are happening there at the same time. And human milk also has another, what I call the milk drunk chemical, which is a beta-casomorphin protein. That morphin, that's what you think it is. It's like a kind of morphine. Who's ever had morphine? Damn, that's good stuff. But you definitely want to sleep, right? You're definitely going to sleep. It is a very, very sleepy natural chemical. And this is where we get bobble-headed babies when you pull them off of the breast, and they're, you can't even be woken up, because the newer babies are getting much more of this in their milk. So they're sleepier, they're harder to wake up. Those are those new babies where we're having to do all kinds of things to wake them up just so that they'll eat. They've got a lot of these chemicals in their system. Now, human milk has both of those chemicals. So does the dairy, which is in formula. There's going to be a little bit less in like a goat formula, but this I'm talking about cow dairy. Cow dairy has twice those opioid-like beta-casomorphins, okay? Double. So you're going to have most likely that longer sleep, that deeper sleep. It's going to look like baby, quote, sleeps better. However, this is one of the theories for why formula feeding versus human milk feeding is a risk factor for sudden unexplained infant death. So while we might say, okay, I want my baby to sleep better, well, yes, some people might need to sleep and do everything they possibly can to sleep. Also, some people might not have access to human milk. And so it's going to be okay to be on formula. However, everything has risks and benefits. And one of the risks here with formula is going to be that there's a higher possibility of infant sleep death. Now, can you do things to mitigate that risk if you have to be using formula? Well, you're going to benefit from a baby who sleeps longer and harder. So that's one good thing, but can you mitigate the risk? Yeah, it looks like we can, because the AAP now says room in with your baby, breastfed or formula fed. Now, formula fed babies shouldn't be in the same bed as you. That would be not be considered safe sleep. That would be considered too risky. But baby should be in the same room if possible. And that is considered something that can mitigate that risk a little bit. Now I'm going to go a little bit further away from the biological science and jump a little bit into behavioral science. When we have a newborn baby, there really isn't behavior. You can talk about it as if it is behavior because it's something baby's doing or not doing, but they really don't have behaviors. They have needs. That's about it. Those first couple months, just needs. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I need you to do this thing. And then I need some sleep. And then I need a feeding again. And then in order to not get a rash, I need you to change me. There are just needs. A 1 or 2 month old baby, sometimes even a 3-month-old baby, depending on their development, cannot self-soothe. Not possible. You can soothe them by maybe putting them in a swaddle so they don't startle themselves, sticking some sort of a nipple or a pacifier in their mouth, bouncing them. You know, you can do things that soothe them where you're doing it, but they do not self-soothe. They don't even know where their arms are yet. They don't know where they are in space. They don't know that they're different than you. None of that. So when people talk about sleep training, they'll sometimes say, oh, you need to let them cry because they need to self-soothe, and we're going to do that with a 1 or 2 month old baby. That is absolutely not biologically or developmentally sound. You can teach them to conserve their energy because no one is going to come, right? The human body, you know, humans are just like any other animal who has figured out how to thrive on this planet. You know, we can adapt. And one of the ways that we adapt is self-preservation, and our bodies will do that for us a lot of the time. And newborn babies can do that too. They can adapt. They can go, oh, no one ever comes for me. It is certainly not worth screaming my head off, right? And needing to use up all those calories when I could be just going to sleep and hoping someone comes for me when I wake up. So that's what they wind up learning, you know, when they're really tiny. As babies get older, especially once they find their hands and can regularly get a hand to their mouth, and once they start doing a bunch of tummy time and can start to move their bodies and maybe even turn to the side, maybe even roll, get their body to a place where they feel comfortable on their own, then a baby can begin to start actually self-soothing. It's a real thing. Self-soothing is a thing. We all do it in a bunch of different ways, and babies do it in some of these ways. Now, the best way to learn self-soothing is actually, again, not going to be just kind of shutting down and giving up after screaming. That's usually, even if they do some of these things like sucking of the hand when they're left alone crying, even if they eventually do that, it's usually doesn't become a long-term skill that they can call upon over and over again. And that's why you find that people who do cry it out sleep training often have to sleep train over and over and over and over again, because the skill was actually never really learned and the child never really felt safe in their sleep space. They figured out a way to go to sleep and get their sleep, but they never really could depend on the skills or feel really safe. Now, some do. There are some babies who, just have the temperament where you leave them alone and they're happy and they just figure out what to do and figure out how to fall asleep. And that's awesome. But a lot of babies just don't do that. A lot of babies are very upset when you leave them alone. But when we start nearing 3 months, 4 months, we can start to do these behaviors. And the ideal way to experiment with these behaviors, talking or babbling to yourself, rocking or moving your body where you want it to be, rolling, even rubbing your head or banging your head on the mattress, thumping your feet on the mattress, bicycling your legs, having fun, squealing, touching your ear, pulling on your earlobe, rubbing your head. These are all great self-soothing skills that babies will learn if given the opportunity. And the number one is going to be sucking their hand, their finger, or their thumb to sleep. Because babies, I always want to have like a t-shirt that says babies suck. Like that would be a great t-shirt. Babies suck. I mean, that's what they do. Babies want to suck something. And so if they've already been fed and they're fully fed and they can suck something that's not a pacifier, that they're not going to lose, right? Because a 3-month-old's not finding their pacifier again in the crib. That's not happening. You're going to have to do that. Right? So if it's something that's on their body that they can call upon over and over again, one of my tricks that I'll give y'all for free is if you have a baby around that age, between 2.5 to 4 months, and they maybe you've gotten rid of the pacifier or they've never really found anything to soothe them like that, you can, if they haven't quite always found their hand yet, you can just guide their elbow. You don't want to stuff their own hand in their mouth. That's not respectful. But you can kind of guide the elbow. So all of a sudden the hand is in front of their face and they go, oh, that's right, I have a hand. And then that's how they learn that they've got this hand to use. So this is real self-soothing. And the best way to learn it is if someone's there with you and you don't feel scared and you're not alone. You don't wonder if someone has abandoned you. So when people say, I really want gentle sleep learning, I really want a gentle sleep plan because I've been holding my baby to sleep and it's not sustainable. Baby's getting bigger. I'm getting more tired. And they don't want to do anything like cry it out. It's not fun to hear a baby fuss or even cry a bit. But it is possible to stay with them while they learn, while you support them in learning something new, like this kind of self-soothing. Now, most people in our culture would prefer to just leave the room rather than watch it and listen to it while they're trying to figure this out, right? Because if you're there and you're putting a boundary and you're saying, I'm not going to pick you up because I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. You're a big baby, and I need you to figure out how to be okay sleeping not on me. So you're going to have to figure out some of these things. You can absolutely support them but they might cry a little bit because they're going to be telling you in the only way they know how, go back to the old way, go back to the old way. You know, I've got my habit and I want you to do it. So that they're going to vocalize about that for sure. And the trick is that in our, again, back to culture, in our culture, we don't believe in just being with someone while they're having feelings or being frustrated. We don't want to be with that. We want to go away from that. We either have to leave it or fix it. Fix it right away or leave it. So this kind of way of supporting babies in sleep is a whole different way of looking at the whole world and the way that we interact with other humans. Imagine if for your best friend or for your partner, you just always listened and held their hand and didn't try and fix it right away or didn't try and, figure out the next step to do. Okay, so that's some heavy stuff right there.
It's real.
It's real. I'm just going to stop the share for just a second and see if there's no more questions, but does anyone have one right now? Okay. Wait, did I miss someone?
I was gonna ask a question, but it's kind of like you might not have an answer, and it's kind of broad, but
Sometimes I don't know, but it's worth asking the question.
yeah. Do you think, or like, have you noticed an association or like a relationship between like people that like have been I guess kind of like forced, like sleep trained, and people that like have a hard time breaking the habit of sucking their thumb?
People that have been sleep trained, like where they went to their thumb while they were being sleep trained, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess like, you know how people, like you were saying, just leaving the baby in the crib and like
Mm-hmm.
they have to figure out their own ways of like self-soothing and coping with being left alone. And so naturally, like you were saying, they might resort to sucking their thumb.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen like a link between like that that phenomena
Yeah.
and then them
Well,
having a hard time breaking it?
I don't think there is much of a link there because the sucking is not something that's specific to sleep training. That the sucking the hand is something that will happen with sleep trained babies or not sleep trained babies if they're given the opportunity. Like if they're given access to their hands and someone else isn't always putting a pacifier or a bottle or a nipple in, then babies usually find their hands. Sometimes we just put things in their mouth so much that they have a hard time finding their hands or knowing that their hands work for that. But I think the phenomenon of sucking thumbs is pretty universal, not dependent on the method of sleep training or how that baby figured out how to sleep. But that's a great question. Yeah. I think, there's another study, whereas you can hear me and see like I'm obviously not like pro traditional sleep training, but there's also something to be said for paying attention to the science that we do have, even though it's imperfect. And although there are a lot of people, especially in lactation and in the attachment parenting realm, who want to say that by any kind of sleep training, you are causing psychological damage to your child. There are lots of people who speak like that, but we do have some longitudinal studies about people through their lifetime and looking at things like how they communicate with other people and what they did with their education and their job and how they get their connections with their parents as young adults, I think usually going up to about the 20s, like college age. And they were not able to find detrimental effects long-term of sleep training. So we do need to be present, we want to be gentle with babies, but we also don't want to be giving people, ideas that are not backed by science. Because if you think about those studies, those longitudinal studies around sleep training, you kind of have to look at the full picture here, because maybe a child who was sleep trained and screamed their head off for 3 days, maybe that person actually winds up growing up more well adjusted than the baby who was bed sharing and their parent was up every 45 minutes for 2 years and wasn't mentally well. So you kind of want to think about, like, what is the full picture there? And it's really hard to compare those things and to get that much information from people. So we really want to try and give people, like, the science that we do have, some balanced perspectives if we can find them. Always good to provide multiple perspectives on things like this. Thank you
think
for
there's-
bringing that up.
I think there's so many other factors involved, because there are people who are the crunchy moms, but really when you look at them closely, they're not really, they're doing these things in a performative fashion
Or from anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the baby could have appeared to have received all of this, getting all of its touch needs met and emotional needs met, and that wasn't really the case. So you have to look deeper than just were you sleep trained or were you not sleep trained.
Yeah, for sure. I love doing this with you, Samsara. I think we make.
I'm happy about that
We make
too.
a good team. Okay, so this is something I like to give to all parents because of what we were just talking about, that word anxiety, parenting anxiety. This is I say inspired by this feeding therapist, Ellen Satter, who works with feeding challenges and picky eating for babies and toddlers, and is a very well recognized in the field of child development and parenting. And this looks almost this, if you change the language to feeding, this would be like what her division of responsibility of feeding, which you could look up online. It's a really cool thing to read. So the division of responsibility of feeding, and I was inspired and created the division of responsibility in sleeping. And the whole point of the feeding division of responsibility is to lower parent anxiety, and so is this. Because people read these books and they say, my baby at 3 months needs to have exactly 14 hours of sleep, and they should have 2 hours at a time of naps.
Yeah.
Right? And then their baby does not do that. Rarely does a 3-month-old baby do that. So then they're trying to figure out how to force baby into this pattern, but baby's not doing it. They feel like a failure and they feel like their baby's a failure. Then sometimes if they're trying to get perfect naps and baby's got 4 or 3 naps a day, because it's a tiny baby, then they spend their whole day not leaving the house, not seeing anyone, not getting out in fresh air, not having any social interaction, being even too nervous to go to a doctor's appointment because you might miss a nap. People develop very strong anxiety challenges. And this is my antidote to that. And it's to trust your baby. Specifically, to trust your baby's brain, trust your baby's biology. To say if this is a healthy baby, we can look at it like a healthy baby. A healthy baby is not going to starve themselves. And a healthy baby is not going to sleep deprive themselves. No. Might be sleep depriving you, might be starving you if you don't take care of your own needs while you're taking care of baby, right? But the baby's probably fine. And so if we can trust the baby, then we can say to the parent, you are responsible for giving the baby multiple opportunities to sleep and when those maybe should be. You can get information from your neighbors, you can consult your pediatrician, you can try and just try for certain windows of sleep. So you provide the opportunity, you don't force it. And you provide the environment for sleep. And whether that's, in a stroller out in the world or in a baby carrier out in the world or in the baby's crib, that is what it is. You decide where that is. And the baby is responsible for whether they choose to fall asleep at that time or not. I'm taking a nap or I'm not taking a nap. I'm going to stay up later or I'm not. You can keep trying to get me sleepier with changing my environment or holding me a little longer, all of the things that people do to get babies to sleep. But ultimately, the baby decides. I'm working with triplets right now. And never are you more clear that the babies do what the babies are going to do when you're working with triplets, right? They're not all going to do the same thing that you want them to do all at the same time. No, they're not. And the baby decides how long and how much they sleep at any given time. So if they're up after one sleep cycle and you're not willing to get them back down in some big old way, then they're up. They'll sleep again later. There's always going to be more times to sleep. If we keep giving the baby opportunities to sleep and an environment that's conducive to sleep, we have to trust them that eventually, even if we just look at the whole 48 hours, eventually they're going to get enough sleep. It might not be what you think it's supposed to look like right this second for this particular nap, but eventually they get enough sleep. If you start to provide consistency in the way that you interact with baby, including short, consistent, clear bedtime routines, starting really early, something they can depend on and predict. And if you start to provide those sleeping opportunities looking similarly and at similar times every day, then babies do fall into what I call a rhythm. And they enjoy that rhythm. And then once we have toddlers do best with a very clear rhythm of the day. But we still can't really force them. And so this is a way to alleviate parental stress, is to say, this is your job, and then the baby has a job too. And you can't control the baby. Some more things about mental health. A postpartum professional or sleep professional is usually the first person to see or notice or be told about parental mental health challenges or symptoms. We are the front line. So please consider doing a training with Postpartum Support International so that you have, and they have scholarships too, so that you have the basics. I am a PMHC, which is a longer program you can do if you want to do. But they have all kinds of workshops all the time. They have like a basic 2-day training. They have an online 2-day training. It's important to know how to recognize many different kinds of symptoms. So having ideally 2 4-hour to 5-hour chunks of sleep, that's what we want to prevent sleep deprivation that will cause your mental health to be in jeopardy. And we talked about how lactating parents can get that with a little help at home. If baby is finally sleeping, but the parent now doesn't remember how to sleep, right? Cannot sleep. Like there's some normal, typical to that. Like all of a sudden the baby's sleeping, but I can't quite get with it. That's pretty typical. But if someone really can't sleep, like, or the baby has been sleeping okay, good enough, but the parent still really can't sleep, we need to make sure that people are evaluated for various psychiatric challenges, because we don't want people, anxiety and depression and OCD can all spiral into postpartum psychosis. And that's where baby and parent really could be in danger. And I have witnessed a lot of postpartum psychosis in my career. Making sure that the parent never bed shares with a baby on heavy antihistamines, on Unisom, on trazodone, or on any kind of psych meds that could create sleepiness. So even if the doctor has said they're compatible with nursing the baby, that doesn't always mean that they understand that most people at some point are bringing the baby into the bed, right? They kind of, sometimes psychiatrists and family doctors will sometimes just assume, or definitely an OB will often assume, that you're sleeping with the baby on their back in the crib, which, a lot of people start out thinking they're going to do that. But if they're lactating, it starts to feel harder and harder and harder to keep the baby away from you all night.
Right.
So if this person needs to be on any of these meds, someone else should take over nighttime parenting, and pumping can happen if the baby can still have that milk that has that medication in it.
The medication is not, that doesn't pose any harm to the newborn?
Many of them don't. Yeah, many of them really don't. So a lot of those meds, I think all of those meds that I specifically stated really aren't contraindicated. Antihistamines, heavy duty antihistamines, that might lower your production for sure, because it tends to dry things up. But some people literally take antihistamines to lower their production because they have overproduction. So this is, it's like there's a lot of things. We need people to really be in close communication and conversation with whoever's prescribing or allowing them to take even if it's over the counter. Everyone needs to know what's going on if this could affect sleep at all.
Got it.
The last thing I want to talk about is
Mr. Carp.
Mr. Carp. So I'm trying to see if I can see everybody's face all at the same time. Here we go. All right. So Mr. Carp is very, very popular. The book is The Happiest Baby on the Block. There are the 5 S's, which are specifically designed to support newborns for the first few months. And the idea comes from a good place. It's to create another 3 months like inside the womb, but outside of the womb. So what we call the 4th trimester. And it was designed to try and help babies make that transition and to keep them comfortable. Now, those 5 S's are swaddling, being on the side or the stomach, but of course, only while the parent is holding them for the sake of safer sleep. Shushing, very loud by their face. Right? A swing, or literally swinging the baby like this, or putting them in a swing. Or if you have a snoo, which is something that Dr. Carp hawks and makes a lot of money at, it'll do this, similar to a swing.
Yep.
And sucking, specifically a pacifier. So those are the 5 S's. The first thing I notice when I read the book that so many parents are following in the first few months is that in his introduction, he says that this method, quote, takes practice to perfect and must be done exactly right in order to work. So you literally have to be doing all of these things at the same time, exactly perfectly, in order to feel like it's going to work.
Pressure.
Not only pressure for someone who's probably already anxious about doing the right thing, but also think about how much physical work this is. You're constantly trying to keep the pacifier in. You're trying to keep them on their side. You're trying to have your head by their head. And you're shushing them, and you're doing like a swing or a shake. It's a lot of work. And imagine you're doing that maybe for long periods of time, many, many times per day.
Or if you have more than one baby.
Or if you have more than one baby, oh gosh. I mean, that's the triplets that I've been working with, which is like, let's do all of these things all of the time. There's only one parent who can do all of this. And this parent is not in a good place. So it's causes anxiety. It's very difficult to do. It's very physically taxing. And so they created this snoo to do the nighttime parenting of these things for you. Now the snoo won't keep the pacifier in. You might still have to do that if the baby's pacifier dependent. But these snoos definitely do work to keep babies, to just the second the baby makes a move, they start shushing and shaking again, right?
Goodness.
But in my field of lactation, there's a lot of worry about the 5 S's and especially about the snoo, because first of all, excessive pacifier use does not help babies learn to properly breastfeed, chest feed long term. Also, the fact that the snoo is trying to keep your baby going into more sleep cycles without having to do anything. For a newborn baby, they might need to eat between those sleep cycles. So there's a lot of people seeing failure to thrive because of a snoo.
Mm.
Because babies who, that might be great for a baby who's eating a bottle of dairy formula every 4 hours. But a baby who's not doing even really great with their breastfeeding and they need to be eating every 1.5 hours to 2 hours, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Another thing is that if you just want to look like, for cultural anthropology, just cross-culturally, you can say, do we see these things? What do we see? Like cross-culturally, across many, many cultures. What are things that are really typical that it seems like babies kind of do or need us to do to help them fall asleep? There's really just like 2. Anyone want to guess what they are? They're going to be mostly the same across many, many cultures.
Helping them to sleep.
Helping them to sleep, but not even so much work to help them to sleep. There's just a couple things that people do and then babies fall asleep.
You're talking about baby wearing?
Baby wearing. And
breast or chest feeding.
There you go. Those are the things. Those are the things that baby actually expects. Baby wearing has been part of humans since humans didn't have all that fur.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people think, oh, baby wearing's the new thing. What? I don't have the picture here, but I have a slide in a different in my 3-hour presentation where I put together pictures of baby wearing from every continent. So, and some of them are very old.
Mm-hmm.
So baby wearing is what babies like, and so is falling asleep while feeding. Now, those things for many families, especially in our culture, like that works great for an agrarian culture, a hunter-gatherer culture, where you're just going to wear the baby all day, pick your things, get your food, shoot your animal, take the hide off the animal, all the things that you might be doing, preparing the food, and the baby can literally just be like baby worn and sucking all at the same time. No one really has to do much of anything. That's very, very different than having to use both of your hands to do all 5 of these things all of the time. It's clearly not sustainable for humans. And that doesn't mean that, baby wearing and being on the nipple all the time is going to work for all parents here in our culture. That's certainly not true. A lot of people's backs can't handle the baby wearing. A lot of people don't want to be sucked on all day and sometimes can't sleep that way. So, it's up to people to figure out like what's working for them and to just give them lots of options. And also to give them, things to think about in terms of creating positive sleep habits or starting some things that are like constant sleep associations that might be hard to wean off of later. So predicting some of those things for people can be really helpful. I'm going to stop my screen share. Actually, wait, do I have one more? Oh, yeah. This is just to tell you about things you can get from me, and we're going to send you an email later, probably tomorrow. I can give you my free zombie prevention skills for overnight professionals, which is how to work with circadian rhythms if you're working overnights so that you can get better sleep, even if you have to sleep during the day. And then I have on August, oh, actually we changed the date. Don't look at that. It's not August 10th, it's August 3rd, which is my 3-hour webinar, The Art and Science of Lactation and Sleep for Family Professionals, which is 3 continuing ed hours for a few different organizations. If you want that and you can't afford it, you just have to email me, please. And then I have my Sleep Savvy certification course, which is a full sleep certification course, and my Sleep Savvy method, which is very tailored to individual families, and it is mainly a mentorship course. So you will learn by yourself, and you will learn in a group with your peers and myself, but mainly after that, or ongoingly with that, I will be your mentor with practicum cases. So you'll like just be literally making money while you're learning. And that's just the way that I like to do things. So we dive in together and you get to have a one-on-one mentor. So those are some things that I can offer, but I'm going to stop the share and say thank you all for being here. And I'm going to answer any last questions that you have. Jesselyn.
That was a clap, but I was also going to raise my hand. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. This all makes so much sense to me. And I'm curious to hear, because you mentioned that right now you do a lot of your work remotely, which I understand like the power of hands-on support for new parents, but I also recognize that some people just need help letting go of some structures and adding new ideas and frameworks. And like you said, like finding like a custom plan for each family. I guess since a lot of my work is remote, like I guess that's part of my question, like how necessary is it to like be in the room with a family to give them the sleep support? Because I work with families all over the country and I can't be with them all the time. And so I have this opportunity as a birth doula to work with them prenatally to just kind of shape some of their expectations. Do you find that that's, you know, are you working with people where you've maybe done some pre-care or pre-education, or are you going in there and helping people like adjust their expectations and reframe like after the fact and after they've already tried these other things?
My work tends to focus mainly on way after the fact, after things have gotten very, very bad. So really the majority of my work is 5 months and up. But I like to give as much education as possible early on and prenatally if I can. I really like to have more birth doulas in my 3-hour webinar or in my certification class, because that is really when people need to learn before they're severely sleep deprived. That's like the best. It's very hard to learn when you are already really sleep deprived or when you are just brand newly postpartum. So sometimes you can try and educate people in the first 2 weeks because you're in their home postpartum, just helping them recover, but that goes in one ear and out the other. So my first suggestion would be, if you can offer, get educated and then offer a prenatal education session. Yes, I will let you know that it's probably not worth it to try, because I've tried this a bunch. It's probably not worth it to try and have prenatal classes on sleep unless it's part of other like birth education, because people, I don't know why, they will refuse to think about sleep until they're like already in it. But if they already know you and they're already working with you as a birth doula, they're more likely to take like a one-on-one education session. So I encourage folks to do that for sure, to try and help prevent some misery. And And then if you're in the home, let's say month 2, month 3, and you're a postpartum professional and you can be that kind of support, you can be educating while you're talking about baby and while you're doing some of that work with the baby. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and can I ask a follow-up question?
Very quickly.
When we're talking about families kind of finding their own middle way or their own path, I know we talked about babies kind of picking up cues and like modeling kind of quickly. Like how important is it for adjustments to be made like slowly and gradually, as opposed to like trying a different thing like every night or
Oh yeah, those are kind of two different questions. Like the duration of trying something is a different question than how
Okay.
gradual something is. I tend to do things more gradually for younger babies. For older babies, I do things much less gradually because it's actually much less upset if we're very clear with them about what's going to happen and we're not like going back and forth on things. And then as far as, you know, how long, like for them to actually learn what the new plan is or what's expected or what they can expect of parent behavior, my experience and my I'll just, you know, tell you how it is in my practice, which is that we do everything, whether it's 2 things at a time or 3 things at a time or only 1 thing. Babies need 4 nights or more to, and usually in my practice it's just 4 nights. Things go very, very quickly because babies learn very, very fast if you are consistent with your behavior. And they adapt. We're in families. We, you know, humans in families adapt to being in that family and what the other family members need.
Have you noticed, dear, one of the things that I've noticed working with families and doing postpartum work is that very often, not all the time, but very often the family is very disorganized and dysregulated. And then the baby's like, just as you said, babies need patterns. They need routines. The sun rises, the sun sets, the baby needs that. But if the parents are all over the place and baby can't regulate, and that's part of the problem sometimes.
Almost all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's good.
it's like
That's
it's
really
like the
good.
gas mask, right? It's like your or oxygen mask rather. Like it's like you gotta get the parent in line, get the and the mood and the alleviating the anxiety and building them up and helping them feel confident, and all of that kind of starts and needs to be happening before we're gonna just like get in there and say baby's got to change their behavior.
Yeah, and that's a thing that very much bugs me. I was making the baby the problem. Baby's perfect.
Babies are perfect. I know.
The baby's a perfect,
Yeah.
perfectly being a human baby.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take 2 last quick questions and then I'm going to say goodnight to my child.
Oh, yes. Very important. Any more questions? 2 more.
Or not.
We're good. So
All right. Well, I hope to be able to send you all a little email with some links at a later time, maybe tomorrow. And I thank you so much for showing up and listening to me. And my email, you'll get my email. You can email me about anything.
So let me just say some words. In closing, I want to really thank our wonderful speaker, Moorea. We love her. I love her. You all will love her too after a while. It takes a while. Love takes time. But I really thank you for everything that you've shared. So on point with everything that I'm sharing with my doulas. And I hope the mamas who are here with us will benefit. When this video will eventually end up on the Oakland Better Birth Foundation's YouTube with lots of information. I want everybody who feels called to take Moorea's class. I want people to find this 5 years from now. I'm going to call that wonderful lady about infant sleep. So we want to do that and support her and support, you know, safe sleep, lovely sleep for mamas, papas, parents, and their little ones. So thank you again. Love you so much. And good night to everybody. Peace and baby blessings, y'all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Jess.
Thank you. Good night.